Well, President Biden has a busy week, Sean, ahead of him. Today, he held a virtual meeting with several European leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, among others. And on Thursday, Biden will meet with NATO and European Union leaders in Brussels to discuss strengthening NATO's defense, as well as Russian sanctions and humanitarian efforts for displaced Ukrainians. And then on Saturday, Biden will meet with Polish President Duda in Warsaw to discuss the humanitarian and human rights crisis from Ukraine. And one note, I will say, a senior advisor to President Zelensky invited President Biden to Kyiv, but said, quote, if he's brave. The White House has said they have no plans of him going at this point. Well, for more on this, let's welcome in former State Department spokesperson under former President Trump, Morgan Ortagus. Morgan, welcome back to the show. Last week, President Biden called Putin a war criminal. I mean, what does this mean for Biden to use that kind of language? How do you then go negotiate with someone that you have called a war criminal?
Well, it's certainly going to be very tough, but this also isn't anything new. If you look at what Putin has done in Syria for the past 7-8 years, Sean knows this well, being in the Navy. I mean, many of the things that he's done in Syria constitute war crimes. Look at what he did early on in his administration and his reign, so to speak, to Gronsky. What he did to that city is very similar to the tragedy of what you're seeing in Mariupol and throughout Ukraine. So Putin has not changed his stripes, Lindsay. You know, Putin has not changed who he is or his tactics. But what this administration has done is they haven't taken people like him at face value. You know, you keep hearing this really weird thing from the podium. I don't quite get it, Lindsay, where they say things like, well, the history books are going to judge what Putin thinks, or Xi Jinping of China should be worried about what the history books say. Well, these guys really don't care what Western history books say about them. And that's the fundamental flaw of how Biden and his team handle Putin, is they think that he's worried about what people think about him at cocktail parties in Paris. And he hasn't been. He hasn't been for 20 years. It's just we're finally waking up to the reality of who he is.
So let me ask you this, Morgan. Let's just say hypothetically that Zelensky's he's negotiating with Putin for a settlement, and let's just leave it aside for a second what that looks like. But let's just say hypothetically they come to a deal where Zelensky agrees to allowing Russia accept what it's already taken, Crimea, the other regions, right? The Donetsk region, the Donbass region. OK, would the U.S. how does the U.S. then deal with Russia going forward and deal with Putin, knowing that this is a country that has gone in and invaded another country, taken its land? How do we then recognize them?
Well, I think one of the fundamental problems so far is that the Biden administration has been unwilling to deliver the knockout punch. And I'm not talking about militarily. We could do this via sanctions. So we made a very big show of saying we're no longer buying Russian oil, which is great. But when you don't put secondary sanctions on that oil, all that meant is that China, India, or someone else picked up the barrels of oil that we stopped, purchasing. Same thing for the central bank. I mean, listen, the Russian economy is certainly in a hard spot in the moment, but is it on the verge of collapse? No, it's not. Even with these tough measures, I think Putin is probably waiting out because he thinks perhaps, when there is some sort of negotiated settlement that they can, go back to doing business again. Why would he think that? Well, again, we haven't delivered the knockout punch in sanctions that would actually incur real cost on the Russian economy, right? We haven't sanctioned their central bank. We did sanction some banks, but not all of them. Therefore, anyone who has, enough sense to work the financial sector knows how to go through the right mechanisms to continue the flows. So we do a lot of things. We have this pattern, Sean, where we do a lot of things that look and sound really tough, but there's really actually not a lot of behind them. So how do we get to a negotiated settlement? The one thing that we should not be doing, which is what we're currently doing in Iran, is we shouldn't be negotiating on the behalf of the Ukrainians or patronizing them. They need to be at the table, right? They need to be a part of the solution. What are we doing in Iran right now? In Vienna, we've been meeting with Europeans, with the Russians and the Chinese, negotiating peace, supposedly some sort of peace infrastructure deal in the Middle East as it relates relates to the Iran deal, definitely not a peace deal. But who is missing from the table? The Saudis, the Israelis, the other Gulf Arabs that are neighbors to Iran. So what is the analogy here? It's that we often get to the table with the Europeans and try to negotiate for people on what we think is best for them. That's called colonialism. It hasn't worked for a long time, and this administration should knock it off in the Middle East and with Ukraine.
Morgan, we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to get to this before I let you go. The Tennessee Senate is currently debating a residency requirement bill that would bar newcomers from running for Congress office until they have lived in the state for 3 years. I mean, this is clearly targeted at you because you are running there. You've said before that you will leave the state matters to the state legislature. But if the state passes this bill, will you abide by the ruling?
Well, it's not just me. It could also affect other people as well. And there's different versions in the House and the Senate. There's a lot to be worked out. And so I've been respectful of that process. The House version, which passed, wouldn't apply until after this election. Let me just say that I spent the past 2 years working for President Trump, fighting for him, just like Sean did. And that's how I earned his endorsement. And I think what the voters of Tennessee want is the ability to decide who best represents them. So I strongly believe that this should be the decision of the Tennessee voters.
All right. Morgan Ortagus, always good to see you. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.